Join us today on The Informed to talk all things coming election. We've got Victoria's Shadow Minister for Planning, Ryan Smith. We've got one of Australia's leading law solicitors in Caroline Council, and we've got the infamous Ian Cook of iCook Foods and a Sludgate notoriety. Good morning, team.
Good morning.
Hi, Michael.
Now, the election, we're 11 days out. Things seem to be turning around. We've had a second debate. The second debate was a little bit more of the calibre we expect from our leaders without the argy-bargy, which came from both sides. Ryan, I'll start with you. Do you think either leader has been prepared better? We've seen Albo slip and stumble, apparently expecting a leader to remember more than 6 points when he mentions a 6-point plan. Apparently that's become a gotcha question rather than just a stumble. And are we placing too much on these stumbles?
It's a good question. I think I guess I'll answer through the lens of the current polls, which some may believe, others may not. I guess it's true. I don't think anyone can deny that Albo is underprepared. And you're right to say that's a ridiculous comment to say that asking someone about their own policy is a gotcha question. That's a ludicrous proposition. But having said all that, the public still seems to be putting him up there as a very viable alternative. So we'll see what happens. But as far as being prepared, look, it's clear after 23 years in Parliament, he should be more prepared. It's clear that after 3 years as the opposition leader, he should be more prepared. And it's clear that if he really wants to present as the alternative Prime Minister, he should be far more prepared. And the commentary I've seen that if he can't handle a press conference, then how is he going to handle international relations, confrontations that he has in a myriad of different ways over a 3-year term as Prime Minister. So he is unprepared for the election campaign. He appears underprepared to be the Prime Minister, but through that, he also appears like he might make it to the Lodge.
Is that the lack of appreciation, should I say, that we hold Morrison in? Is he a better, worst choice? Is that how we do? Is he going to do the Stephen Bradbury here?
I think he may well. Well, it's certainly possible. Certainly, if you look at Sportsbet, if you look at the polls, I mean, remember, they can all be wrong. I think Sportsbet paid out early on a shortened win. So these things can be misleading. But at the moment, it appears to me that in some quarters, people really don't care whether he's prepared or not. I would argue that in the current circumstances with international relations getting strained with our Asian neighbours and the bounce back that we need from COVID, I don't really think it matters whether you like the guy or not. I think you've got to appreciate he's brought a team and see who is more prepared to take us through. As I said, it's not a popularity contest, although it seems that's the way it's going. It shouldn't be. That what's best for the country should be on people's minds, not whether they personally like the bloke or not.
Yeah. Caroline, given your expertise in the field you work in, the solicitor, to me it was reminiscent of The Castle, the famous scene with the solicitor Dennis Veduno. It's about the vibe, it's about the feeling. And does this come down to his handlers, or does this come down to him, or was it just a brain snap where he literally forgot, do you think?
He's got to take some responsibility here. As Ryan says, he's been in dress rehearsal mode. So he hasn't learned anything through dress rehearsal. All four of us speak to media, and I think we pretty much know what is the topic, what are our points, what are our winning points, what are going to be our counter arguments if we try to get snookered by the press. So we're, in the main, apart from Ryan, we're lay people, we're business people. So if we can muster that level of preparation, my God, the person that is putting up his hand and asking Australia to vote him in, effectively his party in, and therefore him in as Prime Minister, he has to take responsibility for his lack of preparation. I mean, for heaven's sakes, the unemployment rate and the cash rate with the RBA. He should know this. He should be sleeping with this under his pillow at night. It should be automatically information at his fingertips that he can regurgitate when dealing with the press. So if he doesn't understand domestic affairs, as Ryan has said, oh my God, as Prime Minister when you're on the world stage, mind you, what was Scott Morrison doing while the Solomon Islands were playing footsie with China? So it's a really interesting phenomenon. But, you know, if you're asking me if I were to place a bet on this, I think ScoMo's back in.
What do you think, Ian?
So my view on Albanese is that you've got someone who has taken if you like, the negative approach. So he's always been the attack dog for Labor against the opposition. So he never immersed himself in any of the substantive issues that affected everyone. His job always was just attack, 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 and be the negative voice. The last few years, he's become the opposition leader. Now he puts himself forward as the Prime Minister without that substantive background in the issues that matter to all Australians. And therefore, you have to say he's not who you want as Prime Minister, because he's not there for those reasons. He's there for himself. He's not there because he is altruistically wanting to help the vulnerable and the people that the Labor Party purport to be there for. And in fact, if he gets in, I would suggest he got in under the old adage that oppositions don't win, governments lose. And I think that if anything, as Caroline just said, where was Scott Morrison when China was talking to the Solomon Islands? When Labor states were locking up their citizens and shooting them with rubber bullets, there should have been outrage, but there wasn't. And it's that acceptance of not doing anything that I think may play against him in the fullness of time.
Yeah, we really saw the limitations.
I still hope Carol. That's right. I still hope Caroline's right, by the way.
Good to have an unbiased, unvarnished view there, Ian. But we actually saw the limitations of federation in full flight during COVID. Has that played into Albanese and hurt Morrison, or vice versa, do you think?
I'm hoping that it's separated. Like, I'm hoping that people in Victoria can see what this Labor government did to them and the lies that were used for control and abuse. That's one. In terms of, I agree that I don't think there was a lot that that Scott Morrison could have done. I think he put together, hopefully a consensus group that were going to help work on this pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. But what he should have done is, when you had these abuses of the power, even if he couldn't do anything, he should have at least said something. And that would have pushed it back to the responsible people, which is Andrews in Victoria, McGowan, what's his name, in WA, and Palaszczuk in Queensland. They were the worst offenders. The Libs in New South Wales tried to live with it. They tried to manage their way through it, not destroy their economy and destroy businesses and destroy their general public.
But we've actually seen a problem with that. We've seen McGowan wildly popular. We've seen Andrews, if you're to believe the polling. We've seen the Libs falter in New South Wales. So
yep.
Where do we, what can we garner from that?
Well, I think my guess on that, or my thoughts on that, is a couple of things. Firstly, I agree with Ian that the consensus approach when we were in the middle of the crisis, particularly in 2020, where people weren't really clear where we were going and how things were going to play out, I think the consensus approach was probably the right way to go. What Morrison didn't reckon on was just fiercely political people who put the Labor Party and their own self-interests ahead of the people that they were elected to govern. As that played out more, I couldn't agree more with Ian about wanting Morrison to say more about the incredibly draconian regime that came through mostly 2021, when we were more aware of how things were playing out, the ridiculous restrictions like the banning of playgrounds and so many other things were just something that should have been spoken out about, even if the Prime Minister didn't have the power to actually do anything. And I think that has played poorly for him, because in many ways, I think the Premier's made him look weaker than he was. I can't imagine a Keating, for instance, putting up with Premiers thumbing their nose at him. I think he would have cut off their GST and folded his arms until they did exactly what he wanted them to do. But having said all that, I think people are far more aware of the powers that their state governments have. Whether they make the distinction between the two, I think the ballot box is another thing. But I think that governments like Palaszczuk and McGowan got returned sort of mid-pandemic. Marshall and maybe perhaps Morrison are the ones who have been the victims of post-pandemic, where people look back in our state, here in Victoria, we're getting 10,000 cases a day. No one seems to care anymore. I say that somewhat glibly, but it does make us look back now that the worst of the restrictions is over and say, well, if you don't care now, what was all the pain for?
Great.
100%.
Absolutely, Ryan, you hit the nail on the head, for heaven's sakes. What was it all for if we've just ended up where we have now? Let it rip through the community, fine, but why weren't we doing that while we were salvaging businesses and salvaging people's livelihoods?
And the as we all know, the explanation we got here from pretty well March 2020 through the entire terrible process was, we've got to make sure we don't overwhelm our health system. We've got to make sure that they're prepared. We've come out the other side. We've found that the health system in Victoria is more underprepared than it ever has been before. Overwhelmed, waiting lists growing, triple O not being answered, ambulances ramping in emergency departments. I mean, the guy, while putting us through all the pain to protect the health system that he underfunded and under-resourced, we found that it's all for nothing, and actually things are worse. And I know, Michael, we've gone off topic from the federal election, but I just, it drives me crazy.
I'm the same, Ron. The juxtaposition between, remember Andrew's getting up saying, one life, if one life we lose from COVID is too much. And now we've lost 15 because an ambulance call hasn't been called. My heart breaks. Just recently, we saw the 14-year-old girl and her parents. He waited 30 minutes. But this hasn't, on a personal note, I know we're talking about the federal election. 6 years ago, my brother-in-law died waiting for an ambulance. They sent the fire brigade to start CPR first. We've got the report from 2016 warning Andrews that only came to light because of whistleblowers. This hasn't been a priority for Andrews. This has been a drag, kicking and screaming because suddenly the spotlight's on him. And then he wants to stand up with Albanese and lecture. I just couldn't cop that. But back to the federal election. Now, the latest polling shows last night's debate solidly won by Albanese with the undecided voters, and they went to some pretty marginal seats. And I've got the latest polling that says there are 54 solid Labor seats. There are 10 leaning seats, whereas the Libs have 36 safe Liberal seats and 11 leaning. So there's 32, and sorry, there's 7 for the independents, solid independents. So there's 32 marginal seats that are toss-ups. Labor only needs 10 of those to get in. The Libs need 26. Do we think they can do it?
If they can't do it, the question then is, does it go to the independents? So some of the stuff that I've been reading is suggesting that it's that a lot of the swinging voters out there have the old a pox on both your houses. They don't like the majors, so you may find that then the Pauline Hansons and the Clive Palmer's parties, that they get up and get more of a show. So then it's going to boil down to do they get enough primary votes, and do we end up with more independents, or are we going to see where preferences go? And you know what, the Greens appear to be doing fairly well, and we know where their preferences generally will go. So yeah, it could end up being a very finely balanced election, or we might all be wrong and it's just a walkover.
We've lost all confidence given the last few. When we look at Hillary, was a walk-in, didn't happen. We had Sportsbet pay out on Shorten before the election, and that was going to be walking. I've never experienced an election where I'm not confident to make a prediction in any way, shape or form, because we still have, I think, the undecided voters were sitting at about 33 or 34% in the last polling. That's only dropped still to about 29%. So on the day, what's going to tip them over, do you think?
Self-interest. Never underestimate self-interest. And it would be interesting. And it also depends on what the Liberals do now and this applies to all sides of the conservative or the conservative side of politics, independents as well, is to actually ramp up and get people thinking about that exact self-interest. If we go for emissions zero and we stop black coal and we stop this, stop that, there's a whole bunch of tradies that are doing very well out there today that won't be doing very well if all of that comes in. And I think if there's more discussion about that, this rolling over on green issues just because it's not right. It's seriously not right. And the message has to get out to people so that they're thinking about it. And then you've got the corruption side of things. Albanese doesn't care. I mean, he says he's going to set up an IBAC, an ICAC, something like that for federally. Well, let's see the detail. Let's see how arm's length it is, right? If he's definite about it, he should come out and show everybody what he's going to do. Because at the moment, I have direct evidence that shows that they don't care one iota about corruption. He's there for himself, and the Libs need to hammer that.
Caroline, what are you thinking at the moment? Prediction?
Oh, I've already said I think Scott Morrison and the coalition are going to get back into power. How confident am I? Oh, I don't know. Personally, I am a swinging voter. I vote according to the issues, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't think Labor has done enough to convince the populace. I'm a little concerned about the advent of the Teals. I am concerned about having a hung parliament. And that's something voters don't think about when they are casting their vote. It is self-interest, and I think that's absolutely right. But what they don't stop and consider about what are the ramifications if the independents have the balance of power, and then regardless of who gets into or who takes government, the fact that they have to then constantly dance attendance upon those independents to get any work done, that is not a great outcome, because then you have a very small representative element in Parliament holding that balance of power. I don't think that's good for democracy. I'd prefer a clear winner in the election, but that might be a fool's hope on my part.
And I think, just to pick up on the one word you said, I think they're actually not representative. That's the problem. They represent inner Melbourne and inner Sydney. They don't represent the broader Australian community.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think if we have a hung parliament, the commentators will say, oh, well, the people of Australia, you know, didn't want to give anyone a go. Well, people that vote Liberal and people that vote Labor want those ones to win.
Yeah.
They're not voting in, you know, Northern Territory based on what someone in Paran is talking about. Yeah. It's going to be very difficult, I think, if that hung parliament, you're right, completely right. It's hard to get any work done. You put enormous amounts of effort and concessions into these very few people, if that's the situation you find yourself in, and that's no way to govern, and people don't want you to govern that way. They elect you to govern in your own right and be leaders and make decisions.
All I know is on election night, Michael, my friend is holding Don's Party, the 1970s film. I'm just not sure really which character I'm going to go as. So that's the big decision I have to make on election night.
Just remember, Caroline, flares, the big collar out. We've actually seen what Ryan just mentioned here in Victoria, where the quota for the Western region, I think, is 75,000. We saw a couple of Labor get in with that majority, or that level to start with. But then we saw it come down to independents getting in with as little as 2%. 12,000 primary votes getting in, and we've seen the extraordinary power that those independents held in some pretty pivotal things, the extension of the pandemic bill and a lot of the other stuff. So they're able to wield great power with very little license or representation for the majority
accountability.
of us. Now, last night's debate, Morrison talking warmly and fondly, maybe tear up a little bit about Albo's humble beginnings, but then he slapped it again at the end of it. at the end of this election, do you think Australia will be able to become more united? Because I've never seen a country so invested in politics and so divided as well. There's no ifs or buts. The choices they're making are coming down to moral and character decisions rather than any other thing. This is because he's a bad person, because he doesn't care, because he's going to, you know, self-interest and corruption. Do you think either leader, or at the end of this, will be able to unite?
I'm going to have to leave that to Carolyn and Ian. I have to shoot off to the chamber.
No worries. Thanks for your
Thank
time,
you.
Ryan.
Thank you all.
I think from my point of view, I think politics has become so polarised in Australia lately. I think either leader will probably have difficulty convincing the other side that he's there for them as well. Yeah, I mean, my own direct experience is directly with Albanese, and he didn't care. So certainly, I don't think he's going to be there for people like myself.
I think what we're witnessing is really the populace has lost faith in politicians per se. That's been brewing for a long period of time. But I think at the end of the day, we used to think our prime ministers acquitted themselves well on the federal and the international stage. And looking at the current batch of people putting up their hands to ask the Australians to lead us, I think we're finding them lacking. And that's what we're grappling with as a voting populace, where I think it is a choice of between two evils. And I don't think we're so naive any longer just to vote along pure party lines. It's a case of it does become personal. I think it always has. There's always been those personal slights in campaigns and personal attacks. But now I think the populace is saying, well, gee whiz. It's now, I think of prime ministers of old with great fondness, even though they got drummed out of power, because at least they were statesmanlike, or at least they were leaders, at least they were people we could look up to. That's what's missing, and I would say at both ends of the political spectrum.
I would add one more into that, Caroline. I think also too, what's done a lot of the damage is we've lost our confidence in the media. And this has become a matter of, if you don't like the message, attack the messenger. You know, we know that Murdoch has an overwhelming influence in our politics and in our country. And I don't think that's been good for anyone, but now it just seems to be, it doesn't matter what gets reported. If it's contrary to the side that you're backing, that's just biased media. That's poor reporting. That's a gotcha question. We attack the messenger and never the message. I think that's done a great harm. Now, last question before we wind up. Win, lose or draw, do we have any confidence that the leaders of both sides, Albanese and Morrison, win or lose, will be there in 12 months' time after the election?
Yeah, sorry, what I was going to say is I think if Albanese wins, I think they will keep him there. I don't think they'll roll him. And under their new rules, I think they'd find it fairly difficult anyway to do that. Morrison, I think that would be, depends on how he goes. I think the Libs are pretty good at getting rid of someone if they think it's for the benefit of the party. I don't think it's necessarily right well, I guess you then have to say, well, people vote in what, the party or the person? So if you say they vote the person in, then the person should stay for the term. If they're voting the party in, then the party decides who's in that position. So, yeah, Albanese, he'll stay. Morrison, if the Libs get back in, that's a question for the Liberal Party. And there would be a question mark over it from my point of view.
Caroline?
In relation to Albanese, 2 words: Bill Shorten.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's all I've got, Michael.
it's a cutthroat thing. We've seen former prime ministers, you know, Malcolm Turnbull having a dip at Morrison, and I think again, even though it's been said that, you know, Morrison doesn't have a plan. He's for the future. He's just got a plan for the next 2 weeks. I think there's a lot of people behind the scenes that would also have that. We'll just let this go over, and then I think you'll see the undermining of both leaders, whether it be through leaks or just that slow water torture, the drip torture, where it'll be bit by bit by bit until they feel emboldened to make their move. But anyway, that was another great informed. Ian and Caroline and Ryan, who's no longer here. Thanks so much, and I'll look forward to speaking to you next week.
Take care, stay well.